Hey everyone, welcome to my July reading wrap-up. So it was Jane Austen July and I managed to finish 4 books for the readathon. I didn't try to fulfill any particular prompt, I just kind of read what I was in the mood for. And I also started a 5th book in July but didn't finish it, and I plan on finishing that in August, so I'll mention that as well. And then I read a variety of other books that have nothing to do with Jane Austen as well. In total, I finished 11 books, which I'm very happy about considering how busy it was. Not that the number really matters, but it was a busy month as I was studying for my exam, which I passed, praise the Lord. So all of my hours spent studying, I guess, was worth it. And yeah, I read 11 books, and let's just go ahead and start off with the Jane Austen July books. This first one here, I actually recently hauled, and I had such high hopes and I was expecting to absolutely love it. And unfortunately, I didn't love it. I enjoyed most of my time with the book, but it was a bit of a letdown, and that is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. This is a Regency era, clean, proper romance, if you will, and it's basically about a girl named Kitty who has a bunch of sisters and their parents are no longer with them, and Kitty, being the oldest, needs to make sure that she is able to save her and her sisters from destitution and financial ruin and all of that. So in typical Regency fashion, she is looking for a wealthy husband to kind of provide for her and her sisters, and she goes fortune hunting, so to speak. So it's fun, it has some funny moments, and definitely has some good witty banter between her and some of the people she comes across. The majority of this book does take place in London during the London season, so she goes to a variety of balls, and all of the descriptions of the different places she visits and the balls and the different shenanigans that she gets up to, it is entertaining. And I really did appreciate how Kitty did everything for her sisters. She really wanted to ensure their financial security, and it was very selfless on her part, so I really appreciated that. But the rest of the story, the writing, just the book as a whole kind of lacked a little bit of zest, and it just lacked that extra something that I was hoping for. And particularly the writing I didn't really get along with. It's not to say that Sophie Irwin's writing isn't great. It is really good, and this is her debut and it's very impressive. It's more of a me problem just as a reader. I just didn't really jive with her writing style. But this book definitely has a lot going for it. I've heard it compared to Bridgerton, but clean, so if that's something you would enjoy, I feel you would enjoy this book. And it also has a bit of that enemies to lovers trope, which I always say is my favorite trope. But I'm coming to realize I'm kind of enjoying friends to lovers a little more now than enemies to lovers. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I ended up giving this a 2.75 to 3 star. Unfortunately, not a favorite, but not a terrible book by any means. Another Regency era romance that I read, and this is set in 1820, which is kind of not really Regency anymore, but some people still say it is Regency, so I'm just counting it as Regency. And that is the 3rd and final book in the Tales from Ivy Hill trilogy, and that is The Bride of Ivy Green by Julie Klassen. This was a very beautifully written and sweet book conclusion to this trilogy. There isn't much I can say about the story or what the characters experience in the book because their character arcs and the overarching themes and plot lines really do start in book 1, so I can't really say too much. Because a lot of the characters finally kind of have their stories come to a close in this book, a lot of relationships kind of come together, and it did make the book feel just a tad bit sappy and just a little on the too much romance for me side. And I initially gave it 3.5 stars and rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads, but after a week of sitting on it, I just kept thinking about the book and the series as a whole and the characters and how much I came to care for them. And I did bump up my rating to like a 4.25. It's not a perfect 5-star for me. It is quite slow in terms of the pacing, and like I said, there are just so many relationships happening. It felt like too much. There really isn't a central character. There isn't a main character in this book. It's just a variety of characters, and there's like a will they, won't they, a love triangle type situation, which is not really my thing. So it was just like a mashup of all these romance tropes. But I still loved the characters so much. Because I loved the first book so much and I needed to see where their stories go, I had to read the entire trilogy. The first book is still my favorite, but I love Julie Klassen's writing, and even though I haven't given a single one of her books 5 stars yet, fingers crossed that I will, I just find something so comforting about her books. There's just something about them. There's this quality to them that I just keep wanting more of her stories, and I'm really glad that I read this. All right, and then we have 2 Jane Austen novels that I read. Both of them were rereads, and I had forgotten a lot about both of them, so I'm really glad that I reread them. The first one here is Northanger Abbey, and this was also the group read for Jane Austen July. And oh my goodness, did I fall in love with this story. The first time I read it a few years ago, I gave it 4 stars, and I can't tell you why. I have no idea why I didn't give it 5 stars. Because upon this reread, I absolutely fell in love, and it is a 5-star book. I never know how to describe Jane Austen novels and just classics in general. I always struggle to say what they're about because I'm always scared I'm gonna give something away that I shouldn't give away. And in general, I go into classics pretty blind. But if you don't know what this book is about, it's basically a satire, kind of poking fun at the Gothic romance novel in a sense, because at the time when Jane Austen was writing this, they were the rage. You had The Mysteries of Udolpho, you had The Monk, great Gothic classics that caused a lot of innocent minds like Catherine's to lose sleep at night. So it's just so much fun. Catherine starts off as a very naive and immature young adult, young woman, teenager, older teenager. I don't know exactly how old she was, but she starts off very naive, and I loved seeing her character growth, her development, her maturity, and kind of how she developed throughout the book. This book is just pure fun and snark, and it's like Jane Austen was just dumping her snarky sense of humor on the pages. It was the best. There were some side characters that I absolutely detested, more like loved to hate. Just gatekeepers and emotionally manipulative people. The Thorpes, you know if you know. And then of course, Catherine goes to Northanger Abbey, and then the things that she believes are going on there. It's just hilarious. Such a good time. 5 stars. I'm so glad I reread this, and this is not a romance in my opinion, but I do love Henry Tilney. I love him, and he's perfect for Catherine, so great book. And then the other Jane Austen novel I read had a very different tone to it, and that is Persuasion. This one is, in my opinion, her most romantic book now that I've read all of them, and now that I've read a couple of them more than once, I honestly think this might even be more romantic than Pride and Prejudice. It's the letter. It's the letter. I think I read it 10 times when I finished the book. I couldn't stop rereading it. It was so beautiful. While I was reading it, I actually ended up using this bookmark that I've had for a while, and the quote is from the letter, so the experience was just wonderful. So in Persuasion, we have Anne Elliot, of course, who was persuaded to break off her engagement to Captain Wentworth, who was in the Navy, and she was persuaded by this woman, Lady Russell, who's kind of like a mother figure in her life, as Anne's actual mother had passed away many years ago, and so she's kind of lived with this decision for many years. It's been, I think, like 8 years. Then Captain Wentworth reappears, and they both have a lot to work through, a lot of resentment, a lot of regret, and thinking, you know, what could have been. It is the classic second chance romance. I feel like everyone knows, even if they haven't read this book, this is the second chance romance story. I had also forgotten, this is another one I read a few years ago, but I had forgotten how autumnal this book is. There are so many references to the fall weather and, you know, the seaside and storms and leaves blowing in the wind and November and rain. And it was so not melancholic, but almost melancholic. It was just very romantically gloomy, if that makes any sense. I did end up giving this one 4.5 stars. The romance is 10 stars. This is my favorite romance, but I would probably change my mind if I reread Pride and Prejudice or Emma right now, but either way, right now, this is my favorite out of Jane Austen's romances. But the side characters weren't my absolute favorite, except for a few like the Musgroves, the Crofts, and Anne's sister Mary. She was funny, but in general, I just found the plot to kind of slog at times. But like I said, the romance was incredible, so 4.5 stars. The romance is 10 stars. And if any of you are interested in reading this book and didn't get a chance to for Jane Austen July, it's a great fall read for sure. So these are the 4 books I managed to finish for Jane Austen July, and I had also started another classic, and this is Camilla by Frances Burney. Frances Burney was a contemporary of Jane Austen, and Jane Austen was a big fan of her works. I'm about that far, and then I just kind of split up the pages based on how many pages I want to read so that I can finish the book by the end of August. And this book, I don't even know what it's about. It's about Camilla and her family, and there is this young guy that is obviously in love with Camilla, but there's a lot kind of preventing them from being together, and there's a lot, but not much happening at the same time. It's one of those books where it's like, I'm already on page 333, and I feel like nothing has happened other than the characters growing up from kids to adulthood and going to balls and drama and being taught life lessons by their parents, and Camilla's brother playing pranks on her and her sisters, and just a lot of humor and a lot of moralizing, and it's really interesting. I don't think I've ever read a book like this, but I am really enjoying it, and I want to keep picking it up. The back of the book actually describes it pretty well. It says, "This book deals with the matrimonial concerns of a group of young people, Camilla and her sisters, the daughter of a country parson, and their cousin Indiana, and in particular with the love affair between Camilla herself and her eligible suitor Edgar." And that's not a spoiler. From the very beginning, you know that they're gonna have some tension between them. The path of true love, however, is strewn with intrigue and misunderstanding, and the plot thickened by a marvelous assortment of characters. Among them, Sir Hugh Tyrold, Camilla's good-natured but unpractical uncle. He is hilarious, I just have to say, I love Sir Hugh. The grotesque tutor, Dr. Orkborn, and the fop, Sir Sedley Clarendel. Can't stand Sir Sedley. And this was published in, I think, the 1790s, so it's so fun. It's just really dense and hard to read at times, and I find myself having to reread paragraphs a lot of the time, but it's so rewarding. So I'm really proud of myself for pushing myself through this. Besides Shakespeare, this is one of the most challenging books I've read, so very proud of myself. All right, and moving on to the books that I finished in July that have nothing to do with Jane Austen July. These were just a mix of some historical fiction, some mysteries, and a contemporary romance, which that surprises even me. This first one, I am so embarrassed. I remember absolutely nothing about it other than what it's a retelling of. So it's A Midwinter's Wedding, and this is by Melanie Sellier. It is a novella. I think it's like 3.5 in the series, so it's after book 3 in the Four Kingdoms series. I read book 3 in June, I believe, and this one, I just don't remember what happens. I just remember it's a retelling of The Frog Prince, so let me pull up the Goodreads for it. So basically, we have Princess Cordelia, and she shows up at her brother's wedding, which is in another kingdom from the one that she is a part of, and she notices some things going on and thinks that something nefarious is happening, and so she enlists the help of Ferdinand, who is the ugliest man at court. So he's like the Frog Prince. That makes sense. So I was in the mood for something really short and easy, and it is a novella, so I listened to it on audio. It was cute, and I do remember liking Cordelia as a character, and I'm personally not too picky with fairy tale retellings. If I'm in the mood for one, I'm not very picky. The cover is also very beautiful, so that is A Midwinter's Wedding. Next up is To Disguise the Truth by Jen Toronto, and this one is the third book in the Bleecker Street Inquiry Agency series. So in each of the 3 books, you have a main female character, and they're all part of this Bleecker Street Inquiry Agency. They're kind of like private investigators that help people out, and it takes place in the 1800s in New York, I believe. And this third book is about Eunice, and she's kind of a mysterious character throughout the first 2 books. We don't really know much about her, and in this book we kind of delve into her past and who she is and why she kind of has this persona of the grieving widow. She always has widow's weeds on, and no one really knows why. She never shows her face, so she's always covered. Definitely has a mysterious aura about her. So I was interested to see what the author would do with her backstory, and I overall enjoyed learning about Eunice as a character. She was actually my favorite character from the first 2 books, even though she was more of a side character. In this book, her past finally catches up with her when a man arrives to the Bleecker Street Inquiry Agency asking for help in finding a missing heiress from Montana, and she realizes that her past has finally caught up with her, and the story goes from there. Of course, we get a romance. This is Christian fiction, so a lot of what's expected with these stories. So I did like Eunice, and I did like Arthur, who is the man that showed up to find this missing heiress. But I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. It is definitely a me problem. I'm definitely not in the majority when it comes to my rating. A lot of people love this book, but it was not for me. The writing was not for me at all. There was just something about the way that the characters communicated that really, really got on my nerves, and I couldn't handle it. I would have DNF'd, but I really wanted to know what would happen with Eunice and how her story would end, so I kept pushing forward. But oh my goodness, I could not with the writing. And there are these 2 side characters, and it's not a spoiler or anything, but every single scene with them 2, it was so painfully cringy. The number of times they would just completely stop whatever they were doing, and it was, you know, it could be something very important. They would just stop, stare into each other's eyes, and just stare. And then someone would say something, and then they'd look and they'd be staring into each other's eyes. Every single scene with them on page. I don't remember cringing so many times in one book as much as I cringed when those 2 were on the page. I'm really, really sorry if this is a favorite of yours. It just was not for me. It's not to say it's a bad book, it just did not do it for me. Another book I read is called Mind Games by Nancy Mell, and this is the first book in the Kaylee Quinn series. And this one was really interesting. I've never quite read a book that reminded me so much of Criminal Minds, so that was really fun. I used to watch Criminal Minds a lot, so it was kind of nice to read a book that felt very much like Criminal Minds. But this book is marketed as Christian fiction as well, and I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. So in this one, we have Kaylee, who is an FBI behavior analyst or profiler, so to speak. And she's actually the daughter of a convicted serial killer. So she's gone through some pretty difficult things, and she's had to work hard to get to where she is. And there are a lot of people who have kind of not taken her seriously and, you know, tried to ruin her career. One of them being this journalist who ends up getting a poem anonymously that indicates basically that this string of murders is going to occur. And Kaylee is, of course, tasked with trying to figure out what on earth is going on, who is sending these poems, and how to stop them and prevent these murders from happening. She's paired with another FBI agent named Noah, and they start on this quest to prevent murders from happening. The story goes from there. It was, in my opinion, very well done. It was very well paced. I very much enjoyed it. It's not really my genre. It's not what I gravitate towards, but it kind of was nice to read just in the midst of all the Jane Austen books, you know, and all the historical fiction. It was nice to have a little bit of a palate cleanser. So I very much enjoyed it, and I'm definitely interested in reading more from this author. Next up, we have Royal Blood by Rhys Bowen, and this is book 4 in the Royal Spinous Mystery series, which is becoming one of my favorite series. I'm just having such a great time with these books, and in this one, we have Georgie, who is 30-something in line to the British throne, and it's set in the 30s, and the Queen has tasked Georgie with representing the royal family at a wedding in Transylvania. Some of the book is set on the train journey towards Romania, and then the majority of the book is set in Transylvania. So, of course, when Georgie arrives in Romania, things don't really go to plan. A wedding guest is poisoned. Things are kind of going crazy. A death occurs. It's just chaos, as usual in a Royal Spinous book. So Georgie, of course, is trying to figure out what on earth is going on in the midst of the craze, and it is snowing all the time. It is freezing. The majority of this book is set in November, so there's a lot of snow. It is very, very cold in the mountains of Transylvania in this castle, and there are some Dracula vibes. It's just cold and dark, and the vibes were perfect. If you've read at least the first book, you know that Georgie has met a very dashing Irishman named Darcy O'Mara, so we get a little bit more of him in this book as well. And it's just such a good time. I would highly recommend this series if you're looking for a very easy, cozy, fun mystery series. There is some crude humor, and I wish it wasn't in this series, but I do appreciate that it isn't from Georgie. It's not coming from Georgie. She oftentimes doesn't appreciate this humor that comes from her best friend Belinda, so that's the only thing that really bothers me about the books. Other than that, I am in love with this series and would highly recommend. Next up, I have a contemporary romance to talk about. And not only did I read a contemporary romance, I gave it 4 stars. which is huge. And that is Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center. And this will not be the last Catherine Center book I read. It will not be the last. I enjoyed this so very much. I have to say though, there is language and there were a couple scenes that crossed a line for me personally in terms of content, adult content, but it was not anywhere near Emily Henry level. It is not squeaky clean by any means, but it's definitely not smutty in my mind. There's like a difference to me, but that's just me. Anyways, so this book is about Cassie, who is a firefighter in Boston, and she is asked by her mother, who they don't speak, they're estranged from each other, but she's asked by her mother to come and live with her because of some health problems that she's had to deal with, and she's all the way in Texas, and Cassie ends up moving in with her mom and starting a new job in Texas at this fire station. And the men that she works with make her job very, very difficult, but it was very entertaining to read about. Her old fire captain also gave her a piece of advice, which is to not fall in love with the firemen. And so she has that in her mind as she's starting this new job, but she's kind of finding that difficult when she meets a very handsome rookie firefighter. And so she finds that it's not that easy to stick to her resolve. That's really just scratching the surface of the book, and the fact that it has a lot of humor and it's very quirky and lighthearted in that sense. But the book does go into addiction, into mental health, emotional health, physical health, and past trauma, broken families. It really deals with a lot, and I thought it dealt with the topics it dealt with beautifully and so well. I also love anything to do with first responders. Love that, so that was also a plus. But yeah, it was just a beautiful story, and I cannot wait to read more by this author. I also read The Widow and the Highlander, and this is by Martha Keyes. It is the first book in the Tales from the Highlands series, and this one kind of feels like Outlander, but simpler, sweeter, and a million times cleaner. I'm going to read the Goodreads summary for this book because I feel like it does the best job at describing what the story is about without spoiling anything. I feel like I would just spoil the story. So it says, Christina McKinnon is secretly relieved to be a widow. She's equally desperate to distance herself from the clan of her dead husband, but as the heir to his estate, one she needs in order to support her siblings, she must first stave off both the advances and threats of the man next in line to inherit. It seems the only person she can turn to is a nearby stranger who seems inclined to help her, but he has a request. Freshly returned from the war, Lachlan Kincaid has one aim: to see justice served to the McKinnons for betraying his family years ago and depriving him of his inheritance. While biding his time at a nearby inn, he discovers the death of the McKinnon laird, whose widow has inherited everything. The way to accomplish his goal is becoming more evident, but the path is murkier than he could have foreseen. As Christina and Lachlan's lives intersect, it becomes clear that their separate aims may only be achievable if they join forces, but to do so is to court more danger, and it requires a sacrifice Christina isn't sure she's prepared to make. It was such a good story. I loved both Christina and Lachlan. It was very simple though. It was a very simple story. Nothing blew my mind by any means. There are certain things that happen towards the end that leave a lot of room for more without it ending on a huge cliffhanger. So while it is part of a series, I feel like you could read it and just be content with the ending. I'm not. I need to know certain things, but it was a really good book. All right, and I have one last book to talk about that I read this month. This is my favorite read of the month out of the non-Jane Austen related books, and that is The Last Bookshop in London by Madeline Martin. This is one of those books that is just very simple, without a lot of embellishment, without the most flowery writing. It's not, purple prosy. It's just straightforward, to the point, not very long. It's a pretty short historical fiction. Not a huge cast of characters, but man, did it get my heartstrings. It got me. It really did get me emotional. It's books like this that prove that you don't always need to tell an epic tale to wow a person and to make someone feel a strong connection to a story and to characters. It can be the simplest story, but if it's written with heart and if the story is full of heart, it can be so beautiful. And that's what this book did for me. This also has one of my favorite tropes, which I don't know if it's like a trope, but when you have companions, it has nothing to do with romance, but companions or co-workers, and one of them is like a grumpy older gentleman and a younger woman, and they just kind of have that, father-daughter kind of connection, but it's not really a father-daughter connection, if that makes any sense. It's just something that I've always enjoyed in books, and I don't see it all the time. Maybe I'm just missing out on books with that kind of vibe and that character dynamic. But we have Grace Bennett, who has come to London to work in a bookshop, and she comes with one of her friends who ends up joining this other group. I forget exactly what her friend ends up doing, but she's off helping with the war effort in her own way, and then Grace is just working in this bookshop. And while she kind of feels like she's not doing much to help with the war effort, she soon realizes that there is so much power in the written word and in books, and she sees how books really do bring people together and create community, and it's used to kind of bring healing to a lot of people as the war is going on. This is set during World War II. She also walks about at night with some other officers just to make sure that people are keeping the lights off so that, you know, the German bombers can't see people's homes and bomb them. And this book kind of spans World War II. And I love what it says at the very end of the summary. It says, through blackouts and air raids, as the blitz intensifies, Grace discovers the power of storytelling to unite her community in ways she never dreamed. A force that triumphs over even the darkest nights of the war. And that's basically it. It's just people trying to stay afloat, trying to keep their sanity and, you know, keep this bookshop afloat. And like I said, a simple story, but packs such a punch. And I'm still thinking about the characters, still thinking about them. I really need to get myself a copy of this. I read this from the library and I don't want to send it back. I loved it so much. All right, everyone. So those are all the books I read in July. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts were. I would love to know. And if any of you participated in Jane Austen July, I would love to know what your highlights were from the month. Even if you didn't participate in Jane Austen July, what was your favorite book that you read in July? I would love to know. And that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!